We'll see what happens.
It'll be like the second week of COVID when we were like, oh, everybody say something funny. Isn't
Right,
this fun?
exactly.
And then now it's like, oh, it's September.
So welcome to September,
That's a great start.
the first online Creekwood Bible study of September 2020. We should all
We are
be so excited.
still going.
We're still going. This is something we never thought this would be this long, but it's turned out to be a
Yeah.
pretty fun thing. So we want to welcome you. If you are chiming in, go ahead and comment that you're here to say hi, or you can ghost us and just watch in the background, but that's fine too.
That was so
Whatever.
very millennial of you to properly use the word ghost.
I'm on the upper crust of millennial.
I'm on the lower crust, so yeah.
We are. I'm technically there was an article that came out that I'm a Zennial, and it's like part Gen X, part millennial, because I was the last generation to grow up without technology, but it integrated in so early that I can speak it naturally. It just it was an interesting article to talk about the generation. Like there's about a 5 to 6 year gap or merge between the two, and I happen to fit into those. So I'm just, it's kind of that Paul become all things to all people.
See, I have, of course, I am like, so 95 is like right on the cusp of like the end of millennial, right? And so I find myself for sure, like, I feel like I go more with millennials. Like, I'm super lazy. I don't ever want to work. I'm never going to be able to buy a house. I'm killing the diamond industry.
Congratulations on ruining everything we worked for.
Yeah, everyone can just blame it on me. It's fine.
Yeah, well, I mean, we do that around the office anyway. So, I mean, not when you're there. Obviously, we
Oh,
practice
so
the
on
good Christian
Thursdays.
teaching of
Yeah.
that we practice the good Christian teaching of talking behind people's backs.
Ooh.
That's oh, hey, Bill Bradford's here. Bill, we're excited you're here today. Um, all right, so we were supposed to have a special guest today, and we were kind of waiting for him to chime in. But if he doesn't make it, then we will just ramp on. So tell you what, let's while we're kind of hobnobbing around here, if you're here in the comments section, we want to know. Let's see. Say COVID disappeared, and you had about $6,000 to go wherever you wanted to.
Oh my gosh.
What's the first place you're going? And let's expand it to 15,000, just in case your answer is Bora. Just in case your answer is Bora Bora.
I'm like, what is the place like? I only can afford the plane ticket, so I can't go anywhere that I want to do anything.
That's pretty much Bora Bora if you've got $6,000, because the plane ticket's 3,000 each way, I think.
Crazy.
We were looking, and this is 14 years ago. Lindsay and I were looking at honeymoon destinations, and I was like, "Where have you always wanted to go?" And she was like, "I'd love to go to Tahiti or Bora Bora." So we looked at plane tickets and was like, "Yeah, let's spend $3,500 each way to get there." And decided, like, we ended up going to Hawaii, so it wasn't cheap, but it was fun, and it was a lot less expensive than Bora Bora. So Kelly's got Paris.
Oh yeah.
That's a good choice. Kaylin, what's your answer?
I don't know because I have so many places I want to see still. But I think Iceland might be next on my list for fun. I'm a little bit in mourning because I was supposed to be going to Kenya this month when there's not a pandemic with Zoe. That was kind of on our plan for the year when David and I were basically, it was like a draft pick of who was going to get to travel where for work. So I think Iceland would be my next for fun one that I would want to do, like for tourism. But I almost have all the continents. So really, if I could knock off Antarctica, that would be, I'm missing South America and Antarctica, and I think that's it. So that's, yeah. Oh my goodness. Keri Don's back on.
Keri Don's back on. Edlin says he's in StreamYard, but he may be, I don't know. I'm going to send him this again just to make sure.
Yeah. This is fun. We're having just slight technical difficulties with our guest tonight for those of you who are just tuning in. So we're having everyone comment along to David's fun question. If you had $15,000 and COVID was completely gone, where is the one place in the whole wide world you would want to go?
Here's Edlin. Edlin, how are you?
Hey, what's up? How you doing?
We're doing pretty good. We were just proceeding with kind of a hobnob question of if COVID disappeared and you had $15,000 to go wherever in the world you wanted to go to break out, what would be your first place?
Wow.
We've got a few.
Oh, me?
Yeah, you. Keri Lynn said Iceland.
Wow. Man. Yeah. See, if it was my wife, she would say Paris.
That's a popular answer so far.
Man. Oh, really?
Yeah, we've got a couple Parises. We've got Australia, New Zealand.
Shoot, man, if New York wasn't like New York was, I'd go to New York and catch a Broadway show, man.
What show would you catch?
Man. Gosh. Of course, the obvious thing to say would be Hamilton, but it's not quite the thing.
But that's okay to go with the obvious choice when it's the best choice.
Then I'll say Hamilton. Hey,
we're very big Hamilton fans here.
You know what? I've seen it twice, and I would go see it 4 more times tomorrow. Like
my kids are like, "Are you watching that?" They're like, "Are you watching that again?" I am. You don't get the rap battles in many Broadway shows, you know.
Right? I think it's the only Broadway show with a rap battle that I know of.
I do know
multiple rap battles.
Yeah. Guns and Ships holds the Guinness World Record book for fastest rap on Broadway.
And I want to say that I can pull off Guns and Ships in private. Like I can pull off the Lafayette rap, but I'm not going to do it right now. Probably. So, all right. So for everybody who's watching, Carrie Don says Lion King. Lion King was an excellent musical as well. I would love to see. I saw Les Mis one time, and Les Mis was a pretty powerful show, as well.
Yeah.
So, all right. I'm gonna go ahead and introduce our special guest here. So y'all know me and Keri Lynn. Maybe if you're joining in, you don't. So we're the pastors at Creekwood United Methodist Church, and we're really glad you're here. But so Edlin Cowley is joining us. He is the senior pastor at Fellowship United Methodist Church in Trophy Club, Texas. And I have known Edlin since 2001 when we actually went to France together. We went to we went with the North Texas Conference. There was a young people's trip. Edlin was young and I was a baby. And we went, I think it was after my freshman year of college. And so we went to this monastery.
Hat, man. You were rocking that TCU hat.
It never came off. I'll tell you what, 4 years, it never came off.
It never came off. It never came off.
And strikingly, none of the Europeans knew what TCU was. It was just a travesty.
Weird.
So Edlin and I went to the Taizé community together. It's a monastery in the hills south of Paris. And we sat on the floor and chanted and worshiped. And my group cleaned the bathrooms. I don't know what his group did. And we sang Beatles songs in the canteen afterward. And we played football, American football, with a bunch of guys from Sweden who thought we were all stars. So that was pretty fun.
Yeah. And we drank a lot of Orangina, which is not orange soda, but it is a very interesting orange drink.
Yes.
Very interesting. Have not had Orangina since
Rebecca.
then. I'm like, y'all can keep the Orangina.
So, Edlin, if you want to go down nostalgia lane, go to Atlanta and go to the World of Coke Museum. And they have a room that
Yeah.
has all of the varieties from all over the world. And you can drink Orangina at that room.
Oh.
I'm not like,
Are you serious?
yeah, I'm serious. Like they've got varieties that they sell, like Coke products that are different all around the world. And I've tried, so when I was in Atlanta, we went several times and I tried every single variety. And I think I found one that I could even stomach. Like the American version, like I don't know if I'm just obviously an American and have tried only the American versions, but I just could not do the Orangina brand or any of the other worldwide varieties. So Rebecca Dwight
Unless
Bruff is.
Delaware Punch. Have you had Delaware Punch?
No, what's Delaware Punch?
You can only get it. You can only get it in Louisiana now. When I was in Houston, I grew up in Fifth Ward in Houston, and you could get Delaware Punch everywhere. But it's because of this certain dye that they use. It's made by Coke too, but they only sell it in Mexico and Louisiana. So we were on a youth trip down outside of New Orleans. We were down going through the Ninth Ward and whatnot, and we went into Walmart. Delaware Punch here. Like you can't order it online. You can't get it anywhere. We walked in, it's like Delaware. Just me. I'm the old guy. It was like Delaware Punch. This is amazing. So, just random stuff.
That is funny. So, Edlin, is there anything else you want to introduce about your family or anything that we didn't cover?
Oh man. Well, it's so funny that you're joking because 2001, man. So my wife and I, we will be married 30 years next year. Which we got married. We were really young. We were that crazy couple that got married while we were in undergrad, and it took it, and so our son is 23. And he was going to he just graduated down outside of Houston, and he was going to be going to law school, but crazy COVID has thrown a little just pause in that. So he's gonna work, and he'll prayerfully start at Texas Southern next fall, and just dropped our middle daughter, who's 21. She's still at Prairie View, and she's an architecture major there, and so she is working hard. And we have a 17-year-old who is a senior in high school. So it's funny. COVID has been its own thing. It's been challenging in so many ways, but after the initial shock of being together, it's one side of a blessing of COVID has been getting to spend time with my wife that I just hadn't been able to spend, and for our family, for our kids, for us to be together for this long. It's like we like each other again. It's like we were together long enough to kind of to reconnect. So it's been a blessing. So it's been a challenge, no doubt, but it's been a blessing too. So and here we are kind of moving into a new season. So that's all about our family. Thanks for letting me share that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're in Mark 14. If anybody wants to have their Bibles ready or their Bible apps or whatever screen you're looking at, Keri Lynn's going to MC for us tonight, and we got about 75 verses to get through. So let's jump into it.
It's like a challenge. Like, can I get through all of Mark chapter 14 with the two of you before 8:30?
You just have to cut me off because
I'm not feeling good for you tonight. Yeah, we are two talkative pastors, so I don't envy you tonight.
That's what I feel like. We were joking, we get these great guests. I'm like, man, we just get the most talkative people we know, though, and that's the problem with having a time limit. Okay, so we are in Mark chapter 14. For those of you who are joining us because it's your first time or you haven't been in a while or you saw Edlin was our guest and thought this is totally worth your time, we kind of read a section and we'll talk about it a little bit and usually have a couple discussion questions. And those questions are not just for our magnificent panel of pastors, but it's also for you all in the comments. We really want to engage and go back and forth with what you're thinking and what you're feeling. And even if you disagree with these guys, they're both smart. But at the same time, if you disagree with him, we welcome that in the feed as well. So we just want to invite you to be present with us for the next hour and 10 minutes as we go through kind of a really pinnacle part of the Gospel of Mark. And I think we're going to see a lot of themes from the Gospel of Mark come together in this chapter for us tonight. So we are going to start with verses 1 through 9. And so I'm reading from the NRSV if you're reading a different version at home. So it says, "It was 2 days before the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread. The chief priests and the scribes were looking for a way to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. For they said, 'Not during the festival, or there will be a riot among the people.' While he was at Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, he sat at the table. And a woman came with an alabaster jar of very costly ointment of nard, and she broke open the jar and poured out the ointment on his head. But some were there who said to one another in anger, 'Why is this ointment wasted in this way?' For the ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii, the money given to the poor." And they scolded her. But Jesus said, "Let her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has performed a good service for me. For you always have the poor with you, and you can show kindness to them wherever you wish. But you will not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for its burial. Truly I tell you, wherever the good news is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in remembrance of her." So just a couple of notes before we get to our first question on this. The Pharisees and the scribes have been plotting to kill Jesus from the very beginning, right? I think it's like chapter 3 in Mark that it's like first kind of talked about, but this is starting to be this pinnacle moment. But their plans are on hold because of this festival, because of this important Jewish holiday of Passover that's happening. And I kind of love the drama of Mark 14 that feels very much like a TV show where there's like a screen swipe and we go to what Jesus is doing, right? We see the plot to kill him and then we move totally to another scene. So we move to this scene at Simon's house, and it's really interesting that Simon is mentioned here to be a leper. That would make Simon technically unclean, right, by Jewish standards. And so this event that happens here happens in a house of an unclean person where Jesus decides to go. So there's a woman who comes, and what I want to kind of just push us to do, guys, is let's just take what's in Mark. I think sometimes we add this passage with similar passages in other gospels that say it's Mary and say that Judas chastises her. Some say it's a prostitute, I think. Let's just take Mark for what Mark says. So an unnamed woman comes and it says breaks an alabaster jar of ointment over Jesus's head. So this was something that was typically done to like kings or prophets in the Old Testament specifically. So again, remember, if you're an original Jewish audience, there are certain things that you hear that kind of like send pings up in the brain. And that would be one of those kind of symbolic things. I think it's really interesting in this, though, Jesus ends what he's saying about the woman, like what she has done will be told in remembrance of her. And still, in Mark's fashion, we don't get the woman's name. Not a single woman is named in the Gospel of Mark, so that's not great. But it's interesting that here in a bit, we're going to see the disciples who are named, who aren't going to understand. So it's this idea of insiders and outsiders. It's the outsiders who actually understand and the insiders who should that don't. So I was thinking about this idea of it's interesting what the disciples chastise her for, right? Because it's not a bad thing. Like giving money to the poor is not a bad thing at all. But I think Jesus reminds the disciples to be present in the moment, because they're also not in this moment giving money to the poor either, right? They're just getting mad at somebody who did something for Jesus. And I thought about like the difference between being and doing, right? The disciples are upset about what she didn't do, whereas Jesus sees kind of how she is being present and how she's being with them. So my question that I had for you both was, how have you experienced a time when the concern for doing outweighed the need for being?
So I see this all the time, and I see it when I look in the mirror. Um, I'm an Enneagram 3, so doing is pretty heavily integrated into my life of wanting to accomplish and wanting to win is pretty heavy in my book. And so when I look at this story, if I were putting myself in the disciples' shoes, I think I would probably have a similar reaction of don't you know what we could have done in that moment? Um, and I think that I think it's Suzanne Stabile who says that the United States is an Enneagram 3, that we love to achieve and we love to win and we love to check off to-do lists, and we have a consistent value on what did you do today instead of how were you or how do you feel today or what did you abide in today. There's not enough time of devotion. There's more just a time of doing. So I see it all the time, and I think if I were in this story, I would most likely be the disciple as opposed to the woman.
Yeah. And I kind of flip back and forth between the two. But I think in my older age now, I'm kind of learning how sometimes if you position yourself correctly in the being, then when the doing happens, if you're in the right place, you don't have to, they call it the economy of motion. So sometimes if you put yourself in the right place, when it comes time to do, if you've done the right thing in the being, you don't have to work as hard. And it's not that you're not working, it's just that you're thinking about it different and you're approaching it different. And forgive me for not jumping the scriptures, but if you think about Mary and Martha, it's the difference between getting the house ready. Jesus is right there in the moment. You don't want to miss him. So like I'm saying, just in the older age, it's just like if you position yourself, and that's what she did. She was putting herself in the right position. And I hear that Mary Martha. Forgive me for jumping off that. I know you asked us not to do that, but
okay.
but that it puts me right there. She put herself in the right space, and Jesus ended up blessing her because she was in the right space. Jesus blesses this woman because she's in the right space doing the right thing. And like you said, here the insights are saying, what about that? They missed the moment. They missed the moment.
Yeah, when he says that, the poor are always going to be with you, one of the things I think about is you use different words, but I was thinking the conservation of energy, which is not completely a one-on-one physical or physics lesson analogy, but that I guess the best example I would think of is it's that old adage of you can teach a person to fish or you can go catch the fish for them, and what's going to last longer. And they could have taken that 300 denarii and they could have done something spectacular, or they could be in the moment and appreciate Jesus and what that brings, right? What Edlin was talking about being in the right moment. I mean, the sports reference I think of is Lionel Messi, who plays for Barcelona at the moment, and he's accused of being incredibly lazy at the beginning of the game, and just walking and like he's disengaged, and then all of a sudden he goes and scores 4 goals because he's read the moment, he was present, and then he knows what to do in all the circumstances because of that. So the other interesting thing about this passage is I looked up Nard today, and besides Andy Bernard being the Nard dog in The Office, you get a lot of memes on that when you search Nard. The Nard was actually imported from the Himalayas, so this is not like cheap stuff. And it was so you said they were anointing kings. The commentaries were talking about anointing for funerals. So they would anoint, and the next question you have is about honoring dead people or honoring, and we often
just honoring.
Yeah, just honoring
people too.
Yeah, so we honor people, but I was listening to a podcast the other day talking about how we tend to honor dead people more than we honor people who are alive, and we use all these resources into honoring dead people. But the interesting thing about nard is it's used for funerals, but it also has medicinal antibacterial qualities to it. So it's kind of an interesting foray into Jesus's death and resurrection of putting something on him that is meant for somebody who dies, but also to heal as well. So anyway.
Insight, man. I like that.
I mean, it's what I'm here for.
Oh my gosh. So that does lead to my next question. So in a
Is that what TCU gave you? Is that what TCU gave you, man?
Oh, absolutely. No,
I said, is that
TCU.
what TCU gave you, man?
Yeah, TCU gave me a lot of brashness, is what TCU gave me.
oh, go frogs indeed.
All right, next
Okay.
question.
All right.
Did I just
So
see a frog come up?
Of course you did.
yeah. Oh gosh. So I talked a little bit about in the sermon this past week, kind of the culture of honor that we see in every other culture other than the West. I think it's really heavily an important thing in the Eastern culture. I've seen honor be a really beautiful thing in African culture. So my question that I kind of wanted to pose to the two of you is how, other than walking around and pouring really expensive liquid on people, how can we show honor to people and not maybe like I would ask that like really pointedly, even now in 2020, like how do I show honor over Zoom? How do I show honor over Facebook? How do I show honor 6 feet away with only half my face?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you said that. And then previously you were just talking about how the how the nard was a preparation for death. So I'm in cross cultural ministry. So I've served in primarily Anglo settings for almost the last 20 years. But I come out of Black church. I'm originally from St. Church. And I came out of St. Luke and St. Luke Community United Methodist Church here in the North Texas Conference. And so there's a saying, and you probably have heard it, but it's like to give someone their flowers when they're alive. So if you look at Chadwick Boseman, and just the outpouring of, of, of wishes, of respect, of honor, all of that, and you see that and you respect that. But when you talk about giving somebody their flowers when they're living, it's I have to. If you're doing it and I'm dead, I don't necessarily get the benefit out of that. My family gets it, my children might get it, my family might get it, but I might not. So it's kind of that intentionality. And if there's one thing that COVID has taught, I think all of us, it's hey, don't take 6 months for granted. Don't take 2 weeks for granted. Don't take 6 hours for granted. So that opportunity that you have to shower love on somebody, if you're a single person, that might be you respecting yourself. If you're married, that might be your spouse. If you're a parent, that's your kids. In the beginning, your kids get on your nerves. It's like, good grief, I can't get away from you guys. But after a while, he's like, well, wait a minute, you're a blessing, and you remember, what a blessing they are. One of the things I used to always say in worship here, when we and I think about it now because we're ready to have our first worship service 5% this Sunday at 11 o'clock. I used to always say, we don't need to take the opportunity we have to gather as a community for granted. And I have 6.5 months worth of a lesson of saying the next time we get together, I mean, we've been doing worship on the parking lot, but when we get together in person, and it's going to be just at 25%, but my goodness, that's meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's write that love note, send that email, send that goofy text, send that heart emoji or that rose emoji or that little kiss emoji. Do that thing, because if you don't do it, it's not done. If you do it, it is. That person who you're sending it to, they're going to appreciate it. So I'm saying that to specifically say, how do you honor somebody? You do it by intentionally doing it. And you can judge the degree to which you do it. You can either do it small, you can do it big, you can do it well, you can do it not so well, but it does make a difference when you do it. That whole thing again of giving someone their flowers while you see them. Some of the nice speeches you'll ever hear about somebody is at their funeral,
Right.
and everybody else can hear it except the person who you're trying to honor. So it's like, take that time and say that. It sounds goofy sometimes. I want to say this to you, and the person you're saying this to, this person, they're like, why are you saying it? Because again, in our culture, we don't talk like that. But intentionally take that time, because somebody isn't. It's much. We're likely much more likely to give a complaint or give a critique than we are to give a compliment. So it's like, take that time. That small act makes a difference, I believe.
Yeah, I think there's a scene in a movie, Empire Records, which is like not something you often quote in sermons, but in Empire Records, there's this girl who I guess is went through a breakup, tries to commit suicide, and is very angsty, shaves her head, all sorts of things, while at work. And at the end of the day, they end up holding this like mock funeral for her. And it's a way where they put her there as a way for everyone to eulogize her and express what they would have expressed if she had died. And it becomes this very meaningful moment of connection for her. And it's, it goes along with what you're saying about is, we get to funerals and we pour out all of these things and the number one thing I hear at funerals is, I wish I would have told somebody this. So I do think, and the first, so what I had originally thought was you honor somebody by giving them time. So I think that fits in with, you honor them by giving them your time. I think over Zoom, you honor them by listening and sacrificing your time, that they are important, of worth listening to. But I think we also in culture, when we're rewarding someone at work, we give them time off. When we're giving a gift, we give a massage or a manicure, pedicure. We give people time out. So it's interesting that this woman is putting ointment or nard on Jesus's hair as kind of a trip to the spa of sorts. And it's not dissimilar to the way that we honor people. And I think it's funny that we honor people's doing by allowing them to be, by giving them that space to be.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to do a big section next. And guys, I'm actually going to combine the next two because I don't really have a question for 27 through 31. So we're going to do 10 through 31.
Hold on to your hats, boys and girls.
Yeah. Okay. So then Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12, went to the chief priests in order to betray him to them. When they heard it, they were so greatly pleased and promised to give him money. So he began to look for an opportunity to betray him. On the first day of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb was sacrificed, his disciples said to him, "Where do you want us to go and make preparations for you to eat the Passover?" Which, pause. These boys never have a plan. Again, here, Passover is a very important day, and it comes up, and they're like, "Hey, where should we have the party?" Anyways, I'm just saying. So he sent two of the disciples, saying to them, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him, and wherever he enters, say to the owner of the house, 'The teacher asks, where is my guest room where I may eat the Passover meal with my disciples?' He will show you a large room upstairs, furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there." So the disciples set out and went into the city. They found everything as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover meal. When it was evening, he came with the 12, and when they had taken their places and were eating, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me." They began to be distressed, and they said to him one after another, "Surely not I." He said to them, "It is one of the 12, the one who is dipping bread into the bowl with me. For the Son of Man goes as it is written of him, but woe to that one by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that one not to have been born." While they were eating, he took a loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he broke it, gave it to them, and said, "Take, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he said to them, and all of them drank from it. He said to them, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. Truly I tell you, I will never again drink of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new of the kingdom of God." When they had sung the hymn and they went out to the Mount of Olives, Jesus said to them, "You will all become deserters, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and his sheep will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go before you to Galilee." And Peter said to him, Even though all become deserters, I will not. Jesus said to him, truly I tell you, this day, this very night, before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. But he said vehemently, even though I must die with you, I will not deny you. And all of them said the same. So a couple of things here. So I like, again, like this kind of scene swipe. We go back to this plot to betray Jesus. But in this version, in Mark's version, Judas just goes to them and says, okay, this is what I'll do. And then they're like, oh, I guess we'll pay you some money. Where in other versions, maybe that's flipped. The scene of this in the musical Jesus Christ Superstar is really, really interesting, I think. And again, I know that we've talked about it like 100 times, I feel like, but I would totally recommend going and watching it if you have time, because they turned this entire scene into a song.
For Judas's eyeliner alone, you should watch it.
It's true. It's more eyeliner than I wore in the 8th grade the whole year. But I think it's this really interesting plot device of like switching between scenes in this. Particularly like you've got this, like, okay, you have this Judas moment, right? And so then we're like going to Passover and we're like, normal Jewish moment, this is fine. And then Jesus is sitting at the table and he's like, one of you is going to betray me. Like, that's not great dinner time conversation for the meal there, Jesus. Like, it's just not great. And then you go to this beautiful moment where Jesus gives us, you know, the sacrament of communion that we now uphold, is where we like take in the real presence of God now, right? Like this big holy moment. And then he's on, you know, they sing the hymn and they go through this traditional moment and Jesus like, yeah, you're all going to desert me here in a little bit. And it's very dry Jesus, which may have to do with the translation. But Edlin, I've been calling Jesus, and Mark, I've been calling him Jerky Jesus, because he's direct like that. Yeah, I'm glad it's funny. This is good.
We haven't insulted anybody. Yeah, we haven't insulted anybody with that yet.
Yeah. This is good because Edlin oversees my commissioning process. So this is great for me.
Hey.
Oh gosh. So here's the question I have. So I think I'm really perplexed by these 2 scenes of this woman who honors Jesus. She shows this great, very Jewish kind of moment. And I think too, David, what I read about nard is like, its smell was very strong. So Jesus would have smelled, I think, still like nard. Like, I'm wondering if he still smelled like nard during this incident. Like, were they sitting at the table still smelling what she had done for him? And that's completely not in there, but I just wonder, right? So you have somebody on the outside who honors Jesus, and then somebody on the inside, it's Judas, who betrays Jesus in this moment. So I kind of have 2 questions. So one is, why do we think Judas would have, I said, why would Judas want to betray Jesus? Because in this version, it's not for money, right? He's not, the money's never up front before he makes the decision to betray. So start with that question.
Yeah. So juxtaposing the 2 stories here with the woman who honors Jesus, you know, we don't know if it's Judas who screams at the woman about the money. But I think it's, I mean, the fact that the Judas Iscariot story comes right after that moment in Mark here, as though it's like a consequence or it's a ramification of the previous story, is Judas is just so disappointed how Jesus is. I mean, you could almost look at the being versus doing. Is Judas wants some action here, and Jesus is like being his self, going to the cross and living in this moment that is going to transform, you know, and Judas doesn't know it's going to transform history, and Judas doesn't know about the resurrection, even though Jesus has told him about that. And so I think that it's kind of like, okay, nothing's being done. And I think what we also need to realize is that Jesus isn't the first one to come and do all this. Like, Jesus is not the first Messiah figure that has run this course. So Judas is, I mean, I would imagine Judas's mindset is, oh, okay, we got the wrong guy again. I know these people are looking for him. Let me turn him in so I can turn my attention to the right guy. There's so much mythology around the devil or Satan or evil entering Judas in this moment. And I really just think this guy's not the guy I was looking for. These aren't the droids you were looking for. He's simple-minded in his focus of what he's looking for, and missing the bigger picture. And if maybe it's pride, but as long as Jesus is around, he can't go join the next movement, or there may not be a next movement, because Jesus is very popular amongst the people as well. So I think he's just disappointed, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and a couple of interesting takes I've seen on this is that hindsight, right? And so if we're looking back at this kind of as in an analytical way, would it have been an honor to be Judas, to be chosen to play this role in this grand story? So of course, we're looking at front ways going this way. Judas betrays Jesus. Isn't that a horrible thing? But if we look back, it's like, because it's not like it's just a few verses, and then Jesus says, actually, all of y'all are on my bad list, and Peter, you're my number one, and you're going to not only are you going to betray me, you're going to deny me 3 times. And then when we actually see that happen, so it's like everyone has a little bit of dirt on their hands trying to diminish what Judas did in that. But it's interesting to see that the 12 that Jesus told to take this intimate walk of ministry, these are the 12. We know, and we definitely talk more about the one, but all 12 of them have a hand in turning their back on Jesus. One of my just things that gets me. So if you're Peter, right? You hear the cock crow for the 3rd time, and you're like, I did it. If I'm Peter, every time I hear a rooster crow for the rest of my life, I'm just like messed up, because I'm reminded of my mistake again and again and again. So I'm really glad that we had that breakfast on the beach where I can kind of get that made right, because if not, every time I hear that, I'm reminded of the worst mistake that I made in my life. And one of my favorite sermons I ever preached, it was not my original idea. I saw it somewhere else, but I played the loop of a rooster crowing through the sermon and preached after getting that out. I spent the rest of the sermon preaching over a rooster crow, the rest of the sermon, talking about how that was playing in his head over and over. And people were just like, that was so annoying. It's like, imagine how Peter must have felt to have that reminder of your mistake every time you heard it. So that's just my piece.
Yeah.
That's so good. Wow. So, David, we'll just start playing the audio of you crying in worship this past week. So, David, backstory, David participated in Children's Moment, and he may or may not have had a very passionate, wailing cry-ish. You can give an example, David, if you feel like it. Yep.
Something along that line.
Yeah, don't run that on me, dude. I thought you were gonna say like the kids responded and it touched your heart and you began to weep.
Oh no,
that wasn't
scared children. I scared children.
Oh gosh.
So that leads to a really good next question I have, and feel free to make this as personal or not while we are talking about crying. Why does betrayal hurt so much?
So I think I'm going to just mention that Steve is commenting that was a mild version of crying. I heard it was a little more extreme on Sunday. But yeah, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is the way that I usually talk about our value of sharing at Creekwood is if you are going to receive something from God, you have to be open to receive it, which means you have to open your own heart, which lets everything out. And so by letting everything out, you let yourself open, and give a part of you to somebody else. I mean, we could talk about physical intimacy. We could talk about social intimacy. We could talk, I mean, anytime you're intimate with somebody, you are giving part of yourself to them, and you are allowing them into your most vulnerable parts of yourself. And so to be betrayed and to have someone mishandle your trust is, I think, a little, you can never get that full part of your soul back. And so I think it makes you feel incomplete. You're not protected anymore. You were protected, and you were strong in community, and you were strong in friendship, and you were strong in love. And as soon as that's betrayal, you don't have that part of your strength anymore. So it's kind of a puzzle piece that's missing, and you can never get it back. And I think the prospect of never being whole again is scary. And I'm not going to rush to the good news. I'm going to leave it there since you asked the question about why it hurts so much. But I think it's that. I think it's that you have willingly given someone part of your strength, in all full expectation that you could lean on them at any time. And then when they pull that crutch out, you're constantly limping after that.
Yeah. Well, and so I think, if we put it in the context of this scripture, and we talk specifically about Judas, I think putting that betrayal in context is the assumption that all 12 and Jesus were all headed in the right direction, in the same direction, at relatively the same speed, trying to get to the same destination, arriving probably at the same place at the same time, because we're all trying to do this together. So, like when we were talking earlier about Hamilton, and at the end, at some point when Hamilton talks about America being like this great unfinished symphony, which I think is like this beautiful metaphor, and you think of everyone playing the instruments together, and so in the climate that we're in today, the discussion of justice and racial things like that. So this may be a stretch, but I'll say it anyway. So it's like, for all of us to strive to get to this one place, and if this place is equality, if this place is community, where we're all seeking to live up to the promise, of all men and women, being created equal and experiencing the beauty of this society together. It's like we're all trying to get to the same place at the same time, expending all the same energy. And so it's like when we're not all doing it at the same speed. Some are going fast, some are going slow, and different, some will say, well, we think these people are going faster, these people are going slower. It's when you make the assumption that we're all doing this at one speed at the same time to reach the same place because we're all doing this together, it creates a set of assumptions. And when you have evidence that you're not reaching that at the same place, you're understanding, hey, this is different. And I think I might end up saying more about that, but I think it's that assumption, and like I was saying a minute ago, when Judas, okay, he got dinged there, the other disciples dinged there. You would have assumed that they were all trying to get to the same place at the same speed and would arrive at the same time. And we kind of experience that too. And that's not throwing anybody under the bus. That's just life. And so you might, betrayal is a way of saying it. But I think it's that thing about assumptions. And I don't think it's what Jesus would have assumed about the disciples. I think it's what the disciples assumed about each other.
Right.
I would think about what the disciples thought about Judas and what the disciples thought about Peter, because I'm sure they were kind of like turning in on each other. So
that's a good thought.
So So I want to move to the next section where, so we have the institution of the Lord's Supper, and we could talk about communion for an hour, but we can't. So this is kind of a difficult question. So it'll be fun.
Yeah.
At this time that Jesus is instituting this sacrament, what we take now as a sacrament in our tradition, how does Jesus understand his death in this moment? That's a Board of Ordained Ministry question.
Yeah. That is a good Board of Ordained Ministry question.
Is.
I'm going to write that on the back of my hand for this next round of interviews.
For real.
Yeah.
Just don't use it on me.
Hey, I think Jesus sees his death as a gateway. I was just talking to someone earlier today. I'm a pastor. I'm a church nerd, right? So one of my favorite scriptures is John chapter 1, verse 14. You know, the word became flesh and dwelt among us. And, you know, Jesus, as the Council of Chalcedon, you know, talked about, you know, Jesus being fully divine. So when the word became flesh and dwelt among us, you know, Jesus wasn't just like, hey, I'll take a field trip down there with humanity that's been created. You know, Jesus came with a mission. Jesus came with a purpose. And so it was almost like the culmination of the journey, culmination of what he came to do. One of my reflections on the crucifixion is when Jesus died on the cross, and it says the temple curtain too. Well, the temple torn in two and was over the part that was called the Holy of Holies, and that the priest would go once a year and pray for the community. And you know, it's like, well, hey, let me be sure that the priest is gonna go pray for me. So pray for me, so I might, you know, do what I need to do, because the priest is kind of my access point. But when Jesus died on the cross and the temple curtain was torn in two, what that symbolically meant was you didn't have to go through a priest anymore. You didn't have to go through a rabbi. You didn't have to go through this figure anymore. You could talk directly to Jesus yourself. So Jesus's death, I believe he saw himself as like this gateway to this new relationship that we could have one-on-one. It wasn't some access point that we had to go through a king or a monarch or church royalty, even, as sometimes, you know, church leaders are seen, you know, the pageantry and all. No, we don't need all that. Y'all have my cell phone number now. You can just call me direct. You can text me, you know. So some call it theology and some call it neology. So, you know, through prayer, we can pray and our messages go directly to God. You don't have to, for those who are watching, you know, hey, you don't have to write did Jesus tell? But just to finish that thought, you know, you don't have to worry about, you know, praying through, making sure that David has your prayer concern, or I have your prayer concern, Keri has your prayer concern. You can take it directly to God for yourself. So that's my big thought, that Jesus saw his death as this gateway to open up this relationship that God wanted to have with humanity in the first place.
Yeah. I think there's an interesting part in verse 25 that always gets me, is that truly I tell you, I will never again drink of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God. And there's a part that really sticks out in me, that when Jesus does resurrect, he eats and drinks with the disciples again. And so there's a kind of like, oh, why is this really Jesus's last meal? And do we have to wait 1,000 years or 1,000,000 years or however long before Jesus is eating this again? But he comes back 3 days later and he eats with them again. You know, he dines with all these people. So I think he sees, I agree with a gateway. I think it's a gateway for access to God, but I think it's also, I think Jesus is asserting his dominance in a different kind of way. You know, if the poor are always going to be with us, then he's always going to be with us too. So I'm going to give you bread, which is ordinary. I'm going to give you wine, which is ordinary. You're going to eat them at every meal of the day. But I think he's seeing his death as, I have to conquer them in a different way than they've ever seen before. and I'm not going to bring in the military might, but I'm going to die so that I can resurrect, and they'll see me eat this again, knowing that I will always be with them, and so they'll always have access to me, even in death, even in life, at every meal. So I guess gateway would be it would be the same word that I would use, but it would be the opposite way of Jesus sees his death, as Edlin says, as a gateway for us to access God. I think this is also a gateway for God directly to be on earth, which I know that's theologically incorrect because God is always here. There was never an absence. The Holy Spirit's present. I mean, through the entire book and life. But I think for us to realize that God is here, I think Jesus, there's always the big, like Tony Jones wrote a book called Did God Kill Jesus? And it's the question of, did Jesus really have to die? Is that the great cosmic plan that God sent Jesus to die? Or did Jesus die at the hands of oppressive leadership and sinful humans? And God redeemed that by showing that violence isn't the answer, but healing is the answer, and that God has power over death. And so I think that it kind of straddles that argument a little bit here, is that Jesus knows he's going to die, and maybe he doesn't have to, but he chooses it, and uses this meal to understand his death, that he's choosing this so that when he does come back and drink from the cup of the vine again, we know we're not in the kingdom of Herod anymore. We're not in the kingdom of Pilate anymore. We're not in the kingdom of Rome or the president or the United States or Australia or whatever. We're in the kingdom of God. And so, and I like to say, Edlin, every time I do communion, or not every time, but I often will say that Jesus picked the most common of elements. He didn't pick sushi and caviar. He picked something that we have every meal. Well, they used to have every meal. If you're drinking wine with every meal now, well, we need to talk, everybody. But they had it at every meal so that they were constantly reminded that that God was with them all the time. So anyway, that was a longer answer than I planned on.
I just jump in and say, yeah. What I would jump in and say, even to maybe add to your answer, I think the power is not just, the heading for the NRSV. The heading is the institution of the Lord's Supper. But that was the beginning. But this is 2020, and the Lord's Supper, the words that we say, and the act, the sacrament itself that we celebrate today, is what ties us all the way back to this verse in Mark 14. Think about it this way: taking communion, the sacrament of communion, in 1918, when the last pandemic was happening. So that's what ties us to them, and what ties us, so, and go pick any time in life, pick good times, pick bad times. That's why the sacrament of Holy Communion is so important. But I say this meal is there. We don't look at it in there. But when Jesus made breakfast for those disciples on the beach, are you kidding me? I told you were going to betray me. I told you were going to leave me. I told you were going to desert me. You left me. The women are the ones that stayed with me. I mean, hey, it's in the book. The women are the ones who came and checked on me. The women are the ones who they're the first people who saw me after I resurrected. But I'm making breakfast for you. To me, that meal is significant, because that's where we're reminded. What you just said a minute ago, that's where we're reminded that it's about healing. Because if only meal, we would say okay, but to know that, I mean, talk about amazing grace. Good grief.
Yeah.
So
That's amazing. I'm gonna make breakfast.
Yeah. Your next big forgiveness breakfast, will you serve fish over a charcoal fire?
Absolutely.
Oh gosh. Okay, we have to move on. Sorry, guys.
If this was in Texas, it would have been ribs, though.
I'd argue brisket.
or breakfast
Well,
tacos.
true. Yeah, true.
Or if Jesus really meant it, it would have been like brisket-filled jalapeno poppers or something from Hutchins Barbecue.
With like a fried mac and cheese on the side.
That could work too. Short
With
side note. I saw a video of
And I found out about something last week.
about what?
I was gonna say, or I heard about this for the first time last week. Grilled queso. How about that?
Yeah, or smoked queso. I've heard it called, but yeah, I've heard of this.
Smoked queso. I'm right. Smoked queso. That's it.
Yeah,
I haven't had it before. I want to try it.
This is part of my to-do list sometime in the next couple of weeks because I've found some recipes and I'm on it. So we should probably move on.
It's time to move on. Okay.
Sacrilegious box has been checked.
Let's talk about falling asleep now. All right. So if you've got kids that are about to go to bed, gather them around the screen for this lovely bedtime story that will hopefully do the Mary Poppins trick to put them to sleep, where we tell them just to stay awake and then they fall asleep, right? All right. This is verses 32 through 42. I think is what we're going to do. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took with him Peter, James, and John, and began to be distressed and agitated. Honestly, same, Jesus. And he said to them, "I am deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and keep awake." And going a little further, he threw himself on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, this hour might pass from him. And he said, "Abba, Father, for you all things are possible. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I want, but what you want." He came and found them sleeping and said to Peter, "Simon, why are you asleep? Could you not keep awake for 1 hour?" I just love that line. "Keep awake and pray that you may not come into the time of trial. The spirit will indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." And again he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And once more he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy, and they did not know what to say to him. And he came a third time and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? Enough. The hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up. Let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." So this whole scene is just really interesting, right? Because we've got the parallel to the Transfiguration, where it's Peter, James, and John, the three favorites that are the ones that get to go see this special thing, right? And in the Transfiguration, Peter, James, and John are the ones that are like, "Let's build a monument to what has happened." And Jesus tells them, "You missed the point." So their energy, their excitement, their presence is almost like, I just have to wonder, like, when they're going up this mountain, like the last time they did this, like Jesus completely transfigured and Moses and Elijah showed up. And so we don't get any record of like, oh man, what's going to happen next? Like they're just kind of used to it, maybe. They're used to Jesus, or they're bored of Jesus. And so not only are they like falling asleep, but they're not even paying attention to what's happening, right? And there's, again, many a discussion to be had and many a sermon to be had on Jesus's prayer. But I'm going to skip, and I'm going to go I'm going to talk about the falling asleep part. So I'm going to skip one of the questions, guys. So I want us to think about, how are we falling asleep? How are we falling asleep to the suffering of others, right? This is in the Gospel of Mark. I think this is Jesus's lowest moment, right? Like this, a week ago, they saw him yell at a tree, and now he's on the floor crying. Like, if your friend did this, you would be a little more concerned, hopefully, right? And so feel free to speak as modern as 2020, or just like life in general, even pre-pandemic. But how are we falling asleep, particularly to the suffering of others?
Yeah, I can. So I think a lot of this, kind of like what you said, but I think a lot of this has to do with how often the disciples just don't get it in Mark. And it's after a big meal. It's late after a big meal, which is it's a long meal. So we're talking 1 to 2 in the morning, or at least. So I understand the desire to be tired. So I don't think they're looking at the Transfiguration. I think they don't understand everything Jesus has been saying about his death, and this is the big moment. I think they're saying, no, we're not going to deny, and it's just another day, another night. So I think that they don't understand the moment they're in. And I would say that there's a lot of times, whether in big social movements like riots, or not riots, protests in the street, or riots in the street, or election seasons, or whatever, I don't think we always understand the moment that we're in, because we don't have the view of history looking back. And we just kind of go through our day and think it's another day. And our focus is so much on doing that it's, well, what's the next task that needs to be done? And I could be out there helping somebody else, but you know what? I've got bills to pay, and so I'm going to focus here. Or I could be out there helping somebody else, but you know what? I'll do it tomorrow because we've got another day. And, as Edlin said, take 6 hours, take every 6 hours, take every day, take every week. Don't take it for granted, because you never know when you get to go to church again, or you never know when you get to do these elements. So I think that we fall asleep because things that are the suffering of others is inconvenient for us, and we don't understand the bigger picture of how, if they weren't suffering, our life would actually be better. I keep thinking about, in our context, it's East McKinney that is kind of a poorer area, or into Princeton. And the benefit of, if there wasn't poverty in those areas, how much stronger our community would actually be. But empowering those communities takes effort away from empowering the already existing affluent areas. And that's inconvenient. And we don't recognize the bigger picture, or the bigger moment, because, well, we'll just do it tomorrow, or it'll eventually happen. So I think we fall asleep because I think we just think there's a tomorrow.
Yeah, I think we fall asleep when, I think David was on it in the beginning when he kind of talked about sometimes we get a little lazy, I think. And culture conditions us to it. So like culture conditions us, I think, as the church, to think that we have to like pick a side, and we say that this is God's side or that's God's side. God is like God of all. And to me, if we are doing discipleship right, that rising tide truly will lift all boats. We don't. The discussion about justice is taken care of, because if we are truly being the disciples that we're called to be, we are being just people. If we're talking about law and order, well, if we are being disciples, the way that we're called to be as disciples, we're going to do things in a certain way. Jesus said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Okay, Caesar, here's your stuff over here. But render unto the Lord's what is the Lord's. So that's a broad sense, and and I will say it's tough. I find myself falling into it. Like, I got to pick a side. I'm like, my congregation, I'm sure y'all's too. I have very conservative people in our congregation. We have progressive people in the congregation. Do I have to pick the people that I love? When Jesus said that the rain is going to fall on the just and the unjust, when in Luke chapter 7, there's another woman who comes up to a meal where Jesus is eating with some Pharisees, and it's a sinful woman, and they said Jesus ought to notice this sinful woman. And then in Luke 19, it's Zacchaeus, and he's a rich tax collector, and Jesus tells him to come out of the tree, and the people looking at Zacchaeus say he's going with a sinner. So in Luke 7, it's a lowly sinful woman, Jesus connecting with her, and in Luke 19 is Zacchaeus, rich tax collector, he's connecting with him. So if Jesus isn't picking one and saying, I'm going to throw one of these people out, how are we mirroring that, or how are we doing that in our world? And if we're following and saying we got to pick these people and everyone else, well, if God had a hand in creating us, and if we're all truly brothers and sisters, there's a broader way for us to live in love, that calls us to be more. And to me, when we get sleepy, that's when, hey, I'm gonna just do it. As I'm telling you, whether it's social media or cable news, it makes it real easy to pick this side and then want to live in an echo chamber. and that's not good for us. I don't believe.
Yeah.
So that leads to my next question with the next section. So it's a great segue.
Way to go,
because
Edlin.
we are running out of time. So
Hey!
we're gonna do 43 through 65. I know it's a lot of long sections tonight, everyone, so we appreciate your patience, but there's a lot of sermons over what happens in this chapter, so I feel like you're not void of total in-depth learning here. So I'm trying to hit some highlights. Okay, so this is 43 through 65. Oh boy. Immediately while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. And with him there was a crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders. Now the betrayer had given him a sign, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard." So when he came up to him at once and said, "Rabbi," and kissed him, then they laid hands on him and arrested him. But one of those who stood near drew his sword and struck the slave of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Then Jesus said to him, "Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me as though I were a bandit? Day after day I was with you in the temple teaching, and you did not arrest me. But let the scriptures be fulfilled." All of them deserted and fled. A certain young man was following him, wearing nothing but a linen cloth. They caught a hold of him, but he left the linen cloth and ran off naked, which just total pause. I love that the Gospel of Mark includes, in all of the things that Mark leaves out, they chose to include a part where a disciple runs away naked.
Right.
We're just going to leave that for what it is. So this is
I'm
verse
going to
53.
say that's James the Less, and that's like his only moment in scripture here.
Poor guy. Oh, gosh. All right, here's verse 53. They took Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests, the elders, and the scribes were assembled. Peter had followed him at a distance right into the courtyard of the high priest, and he was sitting with the guards warming himself at the fire. Now the chief priests and the whole council were looking for testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. For many gave false testimony against him, and their testimony did not agree. Some stood up and gave false testimony against him, saying, "We heard him say, 'I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another not made with hands.'" But even this point to their testimony did not agree. Then the high priest stood up before them and asked Jesus, "Have you no answer? What is it that they testify against you?" But he was silent and did not answer. And again the high priest said to him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" And Jesus said, "I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the power and coming with the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, "Why do we still need witnesses? You have heard his blasphemy. What is your decision?" All of them condemned him as deserving death. Some began to spit on him, to blindfold him, and to strike him, saying, "Prophesy." The guards also took him over and beat him. So just a couple of notes. So we see this really interesting kind of moment in the garden here. There's violence and there's chaos, right? Like we've got disciples cutting off people's ears and running off naked. Like they did not even make it 5 minutes after Jesus is like, "Yeah, you're all going to desert me." And they're like, "Nah, we got you." And that didn't happen. What's interesting though is
Right.
Jesus is treated kind of like a bandit, it says, right? Like this angry mob doesn't know the difference between a prophet preaching truthful words and a bandit and a criminal. And we have to remember too, Jesus is from Nazareth, right? And he's in Jerusalem now. So technically he's an outsider when it comes to the town, right? And the area that he's in. But he still has this really unfair trial, right? If witnesses don't agree in our judicial system, it's that doesn't get somebody arrested or killed, right? Or
Right.
it shouldn't. So the question that I have, and I'm skipping a few again. So Jesus is an outsider and he doesn't really receive fair treatment. And I don't think what happens to him is just. I think that's not a controversial thing to say. But the question I have, and feel free to take it as literal or as figurative as you want, do outsiders receive justice in our communities?
Well, I think I would address kind of the premise and then jump into your question. And the premise there, I think, is I don't think the trial of Jesus was about justice. It was about power, and it was about the authorities, the leaders, colluding with the Roman authority to take Jesus out. The sell to the Roman authority to take Jesus out was, he's a rabble rouser and he's going to stir the people up. We're trying to keep the people docile. He's challenging our control of the people. So taking him out would be good for us and it would be good for you. So there was this collusion between religious leaders and political leaders, and religious leaders and the so-called justice system, to remove this threat so that the people could be controlled. So in this particular case, now here steps Jesus. He he steps in and he meddles where, in their opinion, he should not have meddled. So I think if he was an outsider and he didn't receive justice, if he was an insider, he wouldn't have received justice. I think because he is Jesus, because he is an outsider, it definitely fits. I think there is, oh goodness gracious, can I remember this quote correctly? If I want to speak about our justice system today, the statement is, you can be guilty and rich and be treated better than if you were innocent and poor. And so that speaks to stature. That speaks to, and with that stature, I mean financial stature. That speaks to connection in the community. So, I mean, I'm just saying, because I want to speak, to what I'm seeing happening in the scripture. If you want to talk about today, yeah, it depends on how you define outsider. I wouldn't just say in a blanket sense, yes. I would say that it's harder for an outsider to receive a fair shake, as opposed to one who is known well, and is seen to be accepted versus not being accepted.
Yeah, I think you can move. Yeah. You can move in between insider and outsider depending on what the line is. So if you can think black and white as a line, right? And that's that one is infringing on the other, and you can think of that as a line, or you could look at some community that may be integrated, but the line is pizza versus ice cream, to just think of something ridiculous. And if the standard line is, well, everybody on Friday goes and eats pizza, and somebody in that regardless of race or gender or whatever, says, no, we got to change it to where we go eat ice cream, then if the majority is pizza and that's what it's always been done, and that's the inside track, then everybody's just going to think the ice cream person is ridiculous. So I think that that insider outsider becomes a very fluid notion based upon what you're arguing for. And I think I think the cracks that are interesting in our current political situation is we've segmented people into different camps, assuming that each of those camps believes the same 7 things. And I meet people who are adamant Republicans, right, who have gay children and believe in same-sex marriage. And then I have ardent people who are adamantly passionate about immigration reform and amnesty for illegal, for people seeking asylum, and yet they're totally anti-gay marriage. So I think the insider outsider tends to swing depending on what the argument is. And I do think that in those moments, it is very difficult for the outsider to get a fair shake based upon what the current trend is. Now, like when we're talking about racism, obviously, like, whiteness has been the insider for as long as American has been a country, or if we're talking about same-sex marriage, right, heteronormity has been the insider since the dawn of time, essentially, at least in terms of the justice system. So I think that the outsider, depending on the situation, will always have a harder time, like Edlin said. And I think about like the college admission scandal in California or Connecticut, around those, where Lori Loughlin got like 2 months for bribing officials to get in, and then there was a woman in New York who got 3 years for sending her kid to the wrong school, or buying her. I mean, it was ridiculous, and it just so happens that Lori Loughlin is rich and white, and the other woman is impoverished and black. And I don't know if that's an accident. Like, that's not a coincidence based upon what we've seen in history of the insider outsider. So I just think, when you have, it's a lot easier for me when okay, so I'm going to give a damning example of myself here. The guy at Stanford, I have no idea what his name was, but the guy at Stanford who raped a woman behind a dumpster when she was
Brock
unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Brock Turner.
Yep.
So I don't know the names involved, but he got convicted. Everyone knew he did it. He's a horrible individual for doing that. Completely sinful action. And the judge released him after like 6 months. So he's like, well, this is going to hurt his prospects in life. And my first inclination was, oh my gosh, how disgusting. But Brock Turner looks a lot like me. And so there was a little bit of empathy that was thinking, well, yeah, I would want that some kind of break too, right? Like, I would want that same hope for future, which is a completely irresponsible thought in the justice system. That guy ought to be locked up. Like, you can't string him high up. I hate to use that analogy, but you can't lock him up long enough for what he did. But he very much fits the insider status of what I've experienced in my life. So empathy took over, and there was a part of me that was like, oh, well, yeah, I would want that too. Because he looked like me and has experienced similar things as me, versus when somebody else experiences something that's a totally different personality or demographic or whatever, that natural empathy just doesn't kick in. And I think that's where Jesus has to take over our hearts to say, well, no, we are insiders. That person is an insider of the kingdom. And I think that's part of the empathy problem that we have, is that we're only empathetic toward who looks like us or has the same experiences as us. And we're like, yeah, of course this sentence makes sense. Let's commute the sentence. Let's let him out. No matter, because I mean, again, I want to make this perfectly clear. Brock Turner should be in jail for the rest of his life for what he did. And I'm glad I forgot his name, to be honest with you, because it's awful. But I think the kingdom of Christ, the presence of Christ, the power of Christ has to force us to feel the same way about the woman who sent her kid to school at a different, the wrong school. And for my heart to change and look at her and say, that's, I ought to feel as much empathy for her, even though I haven't shared her experience. So that's kind of my damning example of how insider and outsider has, I mean, I've seen it in my own view, just in fleeting moments.
I would throw in, I forget the name of the affluenza team here in DFW. Oh, yeah. I can't think of his name, but I will say this: the challenge with the outside insider thing would be, the challenge is if you're on the inside. So let's just take inside of your family or inside of a community. The challenge is if you're on the inside and you get labeled a certain way. If you get labeled as someone who is an addict, or if you're a woman and you're labeled to be a certain way, or if you're a man and you're labeled to be lazy, or you're this or whatever, that to me, that's where you have injustice on the inside, because it's like, man, what if you grow out of the thing that you're labeled as? What if you become something? So I think, there's a challenge for the outsider, but then there's a challenge for the insider, not the one that's just on the inside, but the insider who has been labeled something. How does that change his spots? Or what if that quote unquote does learn some new, don't call, if a person has walked out of addiction, or if a person has walked out of, I don't know, if my name is today, stop calling me yesterday,
Well, I think
I think that's the challenge of.
Yeah, I think that's the problem of empathy, is realizing that we're all outsiders on some level. Like there's in
Right.
some way I'm an outsider to somebody else. And so that's where the kingdom mindset really has to take over. We're all a bunch of misfits. And anytime we're an insider, it's a human created situation. At least in our society, we're all outsiders to each other in human world, and we're all insiders to God and God's kingdom. And I think that's the focus we have to really, that's the heart change that we have to have.
Hey man, we're all, we'll come and tell Santa to come pick us up off the island misfit toys.
That's right. We talked about Santa Claus Jesus at one point, didn't we, during this Bible study?
And Santa comes and picks them all up.
Yeah. All right, we should probably do the last several sections here, huh?
Just one.
Oh, just one. Okay.
Just one section. Yeah. Okay, so
we're long-winded preachers. I'm sorry.
We can do this. This is the lightning round, boys. Okay. So this is verses 66 through 72. It says, while Peter was below the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by. When she saw Peter warming himself, she stared at him and said, "You also were with Jesus, the man from Nazareth." But he denied it, saying, "I do not know or understand what you are talking about." And he went out to the forecourt, and then the cock crowed. And the servant girl, on seeing him, began to say to the bystanders, "This man is one of them." But again he denied it. After a little while, the bystanders again said to Peter, "Certainly you are one of them, for you are a Galilean." But he began to curse, and he swore an oath, "I do not know this man you were talking about." At that moment the cock crowed for the second time. Then Peter remembered that Jesus had said to him, "Before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times." And he broke down and wept. So lots to be said. And Edlin, I'm glad you referenced your sermon earlier about this, because again, we could give a whole sermon on this. So I think I would pose the question, how do we face the times that we've denied God, or denied Jesus, or denied the Holy Spirit, like whichever one you would like to roll with? How do we face denial, that kind of denial, in our context now in 2020?
Like, how do we deal with it, or how is it something we see often?
Both.
Either? Okay.
I'll throw either one.
So I would offer up, so the personal testimony I just gave, that was like the 1 second empathy for Brock Turner, is something we see all the time. We see empathy for sin because it looks like us and we wouldn't want to face those consequences. And I think we see it all the time. And I think how I deal with that, because in that moment, I would say that I denied Christ. And you know, Augustine would argue that everybody has a set point in which they're going to experience God's grace, and we don't want to take them away from that moment. And so we need to forgive them as well. But I think when I'm talking from the standpoint of not seeing the bigger picture in favor of what makes me comfortable. And when I deny Christ in those moments because I'm lazy or empathetic to the wrong thing, the only thing I feel like I can do is lean into the grace of God more. Like I try and put myself in a situation of awe about God's forgiveness, which allows me to keep going when I'm ashamed of what my thought has been for that 1 second. So I think that prayer postures help. I think engaging in regular worship helps. I think it's kind of a thing of the more we practice it and the more we are part of the presence of God, we are all going to deny God probably 3 times a day, it seems like. And I think that, and maybe I'm talking more from a Christian standpoint, because I think some Christians would answer this and say, well, I see people deny God all the time. We can't pray in schools, yada, yada, yada. And I'm talking about when I stray from the walk of Christ. I think the only thing we can do is lean back into the awe and wonder of what Paul says is, while we were yet sinners, God still loved us and sent his son for us. So that's how I think. If I didn't have the Amazing Grace moment on the beach, like Edlin said, on a daily basis, I'd continue to be annoyed by that rooster, and I'd go crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, it's that it goes all the way back to your first question about doing and being. And that's why you put yourself in the right place. And instead of trying to trying to defend it, instead of saying, no, I didn't do that. It's like, just, yeah, you got me. You admit it, you confess it, you ask for forgiveness. And the good thing is that you receive it. So for me, and for me, it's the thing for myself. Because when my first interview, when I was going through, I had this whole this question about God's grace, our whole works righteousness, and to me, that's what that whole doing and being question comes down to. And it's like ultimately, at significant moments, it comes back to the being. It's not our doing. God is the one exercising the grace. So, like one of my favorite scriptures is Ephesians 2, verse 8 through 10, which says, we've been saved through grace. By faith, we've been saved through grace, which is not our own doing. It's a gift of God. So, I can't build 150 houses, and I build enough houses to pay for all the sin I've done. I, uh, Pastor Holmes, one of my mentors, he would say, we don't do good works so that we can get into heaven. We do works out of appreciation for the fact that we are going to heaven. And that is a gift of grace. That's not a gift of our works. So, like I'm saying, I mean, we would hear the loop of that cock crowing all the time because we're always denying, unfortunately, and sometimes it's 3 times a minute or an hour or a day. So it's like it pushes you back into that place of kind of remembering who you are. And sometimes the best thing you can do is if I know if okay, sorry, football analogy, but I mean if the ball is in God's hands and I know what I need to do over here, then I'm gonna okay, but God, you handle the ball, do what I need to do over here. And as long as I can do that and not like get to the point where I think the ball is in my hand and I'm making all this stuff happen, it's like, no. And to me, that's why sometimes sometimes you don't do bad things because you're just scared, one. And sometimes you don't do bad things because you're just like, oh my goodness. You don't say you put it on God so that you don't feel like you have some role to play, but I always feel like I gotta approach it very carefully because if the switch ever flips and I think that my acting is making it happen, there's getting ready to be a reminder coming to let me know, nah, Ellen, nah. You think it's you, but ultimately it's God at work. So
right. Yeah, I think the most powerful thing, kind of going along with what Edlin started with, the most powerful thing in this passage is that Peter breaks down and cries, and he could have continued to lie, right? One lie begets another lie because you're trying to dig out, and one sin begets another sin, and one power play brings another power play, and one battle brings another battle, and until you break down and cry, and you just say, you know what, you got me, it's done, I'm caught, I need to stop. And that's why, like, most addicts have to hit rock bottom and various other, So I think the most powerful thing in this for me is that Peter breaks down and cries, because he just knows it needs to be different. And I would love to say that that's a common practice amongst modern day Christians, but I don't think it is. I wish we had a little bit more sackcloth and ashes to publicly tell people, I'm trying to be right. Like, I'm trying to get right. And help me, right? The sackcloth and ashes was to get attention of like, hey, I'm in a community that loves me. Help me to mourn through this. So,
yeah, I remember when I was taking Christianity, it was like putting on the clothes, penitent sinner, which I still can't imagine. That's your outfit that you're gonna put on. I mean, you're identifying your sinfulness, your fallenness, your not rightness, whatever you want to call it. But like when you get reminded of that, it's like it gives you a little extra dose of humility. And when you've messed up enough, when you mess up enough, I think you get it. That's why I think older people are wiser. And I'm 50. I turned 50 last year. I'm better now because I've seen myself mess enough stuff up to know, nah, it's not me. It has to be God that has directed some things. But left to my own devices, I don't know where I would be. But that's why you thank God for being God.
I think that is a good word for us to end on.
Yeah, no, that's a great word. Edlin, thank you so much for being our special guest tonight. I know I was blessed by you. I'm always blessed by you. You're just a great guy. And so,
hey man, good to be with you.
Yeah.
And you too, Keri Lynn. Hey.
So
see you in the next delegation, mate.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Oh yeah. So anyway, all right, y'all. We hit 135 or a little bit over because that's what preachers do. You did it. You did really well keeping us on here. This was amazing. So everyone, good night until Sunday or until next week when we join back again for Mark chapter 15. We are only 2 chapters out from the conclusion of Mark. And it's going to be an exciting conclusion. So, but for now, we're going to say good night, and we were great discussing and studying with y'all and praying with you. So good night, everybody.